Michael Melville made suborbit aboard Spaceship One, and he claims he saw stars on the daylight side of Earth. In Cape Times, he said, "Seeing the bright blue sky turning pitch black and seeing stars appear while it is daytime is absolutely mind-blowing." Then we go to Alexei Leonov, who claims to be the first man to walk in space. On page 105 of his book, Two Sides of the Moon, we find, "What I saw as the hatch opened took my breath away. Night was turning to day. The small portion of the Earth's surface I could see as I leant back was deep blue. The sky beyond the curving horizon was dark, illuminated with bright stars, as I looked due south towards the South Pole. I cranked my neck back until it hurt. I wanted to see more. Moving at 18,000 miles per hour, the scene below me rapidly began to change. Very soon, the outline of the African continent came into view." Then we go to Survival in Space, written by Comrade Yuri Gagarin. The whole book is a virtual goldmine of daylight star sightings made by himself or other cosmonauts, or assurance in some form that stars would indeed be visible. Right at the beginning of his book, when writing about his ascent aboard Vostok 1, Yuri Gagarin writes, "The Earth through the window of the spacecraft looked approximately as it does from a jet plane at high altitudes. The mountain ridges, the great rivers, massive forests, and ocean shorelines stood out sharply. I could see both clouds and their faint shadows on the surface of the Earth. When I looked out towards the horizon, I saw an unusual distortion very distinctly. The Earth was ringed by a blue halo, which gradually darkened, turned turquoise, dark blue-violet, then coal black. Trembling with excitement, I watched a world so new and unknown to me, trying to see and remember everything. Astonishingly bright cold stars could be seen through the windows." Then on page 20, Gagarin assures us, "On long interplanetary flights, cosmonauts will inevitably run up against a similar phenomenon. For months they will see around them only bright unblinking stars against the black bottomless sky and the blinding disk of the unsetting sun." This is not what Collins told us in Carrying the Fire. Towards the sun, nothing can be seen but its blinding disk, whereas down sun there is simply a black void. Gagarin goes on. On page 35 he writes, "To tell the truth, I was amazed at that altitude the detail of the Earth's surface could be seen so well. The spacecraft was going close to 17,000 miles per hour, but the Earth's surface was right there, in my field of vision outside the spacecraft window. How can man on a spaceflight see details of the Earth's surface, or even the more distant stars? It seems the answer is space itself." Then on page 42, "Interplanetary spacecraft will move at cosmic speeds, but in the immense vastness of the universe, the speed will be insignificant. The starry heavens will seem frozen and still. No human sensory organ will be able to register the speed of the craft. The cosmonauts will figure out the trajectory of their flight from fixed points of stars." Keep in mind that Collins claims he could not see the stars through any of the 5 CSM windows. He claimed the only way to see them was to put metal plates over all 5 windows and then look through the navigation telescope. And when he did, "What I see is disappointing, for only the brightest stars are visible through the telescope, and it is difficult to recognize them when they are not accompanied by the dimmer stars, which give each constellation its distinctive visual pattern." On page 55, Gagarin says, "With their eyes opened, the majority of cosmonauts were not troubled in their notion of up and down unless they saw a starry sky below them and the surface of the Earth above." Then on page 73, Gagarin quotes Comrade Pavel Popovich of Vostok 4. "My next job was to control the altitude of the craft on the dark side of the Earth, lighted only by the moon. I controlled direction by using the clouds. A cloud through the central part of the periscope has a greyish colour but is white through the outer ring. Studying the clouds, I could even see which way they were going because of their density and visibility against the black Earth. I was pretty successful at keeping focused on the stars, which will be so important in future work in astronomy. Having found my constellation, I'd choose a bright star and watch it through the inner ring of the periscope. As I watched, I would see it moving down towards the center. As soon as it reached the center, I would manipulate the manual control until it was right in the center. I came to the conclusion that you could not only control the craft by the stars, but also make astronomical observations. Oh sure, Popovich is talking about seeing stars during a night pass above the Earth, but he specifically says that he could see constellations through his navigation telescope, and thus pick and choose which stars to use as a reference. Collins claimed he couldn't recognize constellations period because only the brightest stars would register in the telescope. Finally, we come to this statement on Phil Plate's site. If you were standing on the moon, you would indeed see the stars, even during the day.
When you looked up at the sky, could you actually see the stars and the solar corona in spite of the glare?
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon by eye without looking through the optics. I don't recall during the period of time that we were photographing the solar corona what stars we could see.
I don't remember seeing any.
He adamantly denies that Rene or Casing ever said 4 of the things that I questioned. But I have proof of 2 of them that I can show right here in this video. And there were 4 questions he just didn't know about. Fair enough. Now there were a couple of these that I wanted to deal with specifically. The first was the one having to do with Einstein's theory of relativity. This was the question I asked. Do you believe Rene has disproven the theory of relativity? Your answer? As I have told you countless times already, Rene's major disagreement with relativity was that the experiments conducted to test it were too sloppy. Interruptions during flights, inaccurate atomic clocks, etc. But while he did not specifically disagree with the theory, he offered a much more accurate way of testing it, to which I responded, bullshit! We go to the web page, Hawking Rene's book, The Last Skeptic of Science, and in it he describes the book as being specifically written for laymen with an interest in science, and it contains a section that reduces Einstein's relativity to an absurdity. Well, kids, I'd say that pretty much proves that Rene believes that he has proven Einstein's relativity to be wrong. And Jarrah, for you to go through all that double talk is essentially a lie, because I know that you know about this.
Had Astrobrand bothered to read that section, as I have, he would have known that Rene's conclusion was that it is absurd to consider something as law when the experiments conducted to test it were full of holes. Predictably, Astrobrand did not show my continuation to that message, in which I describe Rene's more accurate way of testing relativity. It was written thusly on page 102 of his book. I could spend a few hundred hours in additional nitpicking, but I have conjured up a much better test for special relativity. It is a fairly simple test, and I'm surprised that the professional philosophers have never thought of it. What I propose is simply placing 2 accurate clocks, one earthbound at the pole and the other on a satellite that is in geosynchronous orbit above the equator. This will provide us with 2 relatively stable platforms of known relative velocity due to the Earth's rotation. The satellite's 26,000 miles of altitude, plus the 3,800 miles of the Earth's radius, would demand a relative velocity of about 7,800 miles per hour. By monitoring the clocks for a year, not possible on interrupted airplane flights, our philosophers will be able to determine if the Lorentz-Fitzgerald transformation holds true. If time dilation truly exists within that year, without any finagle factors or intermittent airplane rides, there will be a time difference of 0.00214 seconds. This experiment will give us, for the first time, a bold hold on relativity. They will be able to either verify relativistic time or declare it to be bullshit. Astrobrant wants us to believe that my responses to his questions are double talk, yet he can't be bothered to research Rene's beliefs and make sure he's representing them correctly.